The Nazi army ran on meth, and it almost won them the war. They called it Pervitin, the little pink pills that turned ordinary soldiers into supermen. And for the first 2 years of World War II, the entire German military was running on industrial-grade methamphetamine. 1940. France is about to fall in 6 weeks. The world is watching in shock as the German Wehrmacht tears through Europe like nothing anyone's ever seen. Blitzkrieg, they're calling it. Lightning war. But what no one knows, what the Allies won't figure out for years, is that the lightning isn't just tactical brilliance, it's chemical. Because inside every German tank crew, every infantry platoon, every Luftwaffe cockpit, soldiers are popping pills that keep them awake for days, eliminate fear, and make them feel invincible. The drug is methamphetamine, and the same stuff that destroys lives on street corners today. And the Nazi military is handing it out like candy. By 1940, over 35 million tablets of Pervitin have been distributed to German forces. Truck drivers are taking it to drive 48 hours straight without sleep. Infantrymen are using it to march through entire nights without rest. Pilots are dosing before bombing runs to stay alert through missions that last 10, 12, 14 hours. And it's working. Germany is conquering Europe at a pace that seems superhuman. Because, in a very literal sense, their soldiers aren't human anymore. They're chemically enhanced killing machines who don't need sleep, don't feel pain, and don't question orders. If you want to understand how a relatively small nation nearly conquered all of Europe, and why their early victories seemed almost impossible to stop, make sure you subscribe. Because this story about Nazi Germany's meth addiction explains more about the war than most history books will ever tell you. This is the hidden chemical foundation of Blitzkrieg, and why it eventually destroyed the very army it was supposed to empower. Let me take you back to 1938. A German pharmaceutical company called Temla-Werk has just developed a new stimulant drug. They call it Pervitin. It's methamphetamine, essentially crystal meth in pill form. The company markets it as a miracle cure for fatigue, depression, and low energy. You can buy it over the counter, no prescription needed. Housewives are taking it to get through their daily chores. Students are using it to study for exams. Workers in factories are popping it to make it through double shifts. It's everywhere. It's legal. It's socially acceptable. And it's incredibly addictive, but nobody knows that yet. Or if they do, they don't care. The German military takes notice. Because what the Wehrmacht needs more than anything in 1938 is endurance. Hitler's war plans require rapid movement, sustained operations, soldiers who can fight for days without rest. Traditional military stimulants, coffee, caffeine pills, only go so far. But methamphetamine, that's different. That eliminates sleep entirely. That turns exhausted soldiers into tireless machines. The potential is obvious. So in 1939, the German military begins large-scale distribution of Pervitin to its troops. It's not secret. It's not controversial. It's its official military policy. The pills come in standard-issue tins, distributed through normal supply channels, with instructions on dosage and timing. Tank commanders are told to give their crews Pervitin before long operations. Infantry officers distribute it before forced marches. Luftwaffe pilots receive it as part of their pre-flight preparation. The drug becomes as standard as ammunition, and it works. Spectacularly. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 sees German forces moving faster and fighting longer than Polish defenders thought possible. The Wehrmacht isn't just tactically superior, they're operating at a tempo that seems inhuman, because it is. Polish soldiers, fighting on normal human sleep schedules, can't keep up with German units that are marching and fighting for 48, 72, even 96 hours straight without rest. And the conquest takes 5 weeks. Poland collapses, not just from German tactical skill, but from the simple reality that their enemy doesn't need to sleep. Then comes France. May 1940. The German invasion that everyone expects to take months, maybe a year, is over in 6 weeks. France, one of the world's great military powers, with a larger army and more tanks than Germany, is defeated so quickly that historians still struggle to explain how it happened. The standard explanation focuses on tactics: the surprise attack through the Ardennes, the breakthrough at Sedan, the encirclement of Allied forces. All true. But there's another factor that's rarely discussed. The German soldiers executing these tactics were on meth. The Wehrmacht's advance through France was sustained by Pervitin. Truck drivers hauling supplies and troops were taking the pills to drive for days without stopping. Tank crews were dozing to maintain operations around the clock. Infantry units were using it to march through entire nights and attack at dawn without rest. The speed of the German advance, which shocked the world and led to the humiliating evacuation at Dunkirk, was chemically enhanced. The Allies were fighting a conventional war against an enemy that had eliminated one of warfare's most fundamental constraints: the human need for sleep. By the summer of 1940, Pervitin consumption in the German military has reached staggering levels. Individual soldiers are taking multiple doses per day. Some units are going through thousands of tablets per week. The drug has become so central to German military operations that supply officers treat it like ammunition or fuel, a critical resource that must be maintained at all costs. Soldiers write home asking their families to send more Pervitin in care packages. The civilian market can't keep up with military demand, so Werk massively expands production, churning out millions of tablets specifically for the Wehrmacht. But here's the thing about methamphetamine: it has consequences. The drug doesn't eliminate the need for sleep, it just postpones it. And when soldiers finally crash, they crash hard. Days of chemically sustained alertness are followed by complete collapse. Soldiers sleep for 12, 16, 20 hours straight. During these crash periods, units become combat ineffective. Entire companies are essentially comatose, are unable to respond to attacks or follow orders. German commanders start planning operations around Pervitin cycles, push hard while the troops are dosed, then hold defensive positions while they crash and recover. And the crashes get worse over time, because tolerance builds. Soldiers who started on 1 or 2 tablets now need 4 or 5 to get the same effect. Some are taking 10, 15, 20 tablets a day. They're not sleeping for weeks at a time. Their bodies are breaking down. Weight loss becomes endemic. Soldiers who've been on Pervitin for months look skeletal. Psychological effects appear: paranoia, hallucinations, violent outbursts, complete emotional breakdowns. Medical officers start seeing soldiers who are physically falling apart despite not having been wounded in combat. By 1941, the German Military Medical Corps is raising alarm about Pervitin. Reports document widespread addiction, physical deterioration, psychological collapse. Doctors are describing soldiers who can no longer function without the drug, who become violent when it's withheld, who are showing signs of permanent neurological damage. One military physician writes, "We are creating an army of addicts who will be useless once the drug runs out." But the Wehrmacht is addicted too, not to the chemical, but to the operational tempo it enables. Commanders don't want to go back to conventional operations where soldiers need 8 hours of sleep. They want to keep the speed, the sustained operations, the superhuman endurance, so the pills keep flowing. Then comes the Eastern Front, June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. And this is where Germany's meth-fueled strategy starts to break down. Because the Eastern Front is bigger than anything they've faced before. The distances are immense. The Soviet resistance is fiercer than expected, and the weather, especially the winter, makes resupply nearly impossible. German soldiers are taking Pervitin to sustain operations in conditions that would be challenging for well-rested troops. But they're not well-rested. They're exhausted, malnourished, freezing, and chemically dependent. The drug that helped them conquer Europe is now destroying them. Pervitin consumption on the Eastern Front reaches absurd levels. Some units are going through their entire monthly supply in a week. Soldiers are stealing pills from medical supplies. Officers are hoarding tablets for their own use. The black market for Pervitin within the German military explodes, and the physical consequences become catastrophic. Soldiers are collapsing from exhaustion despite being on stimulants. Heart attacks spike. Psychotic breaks become common. Units report soldiers hallucinating, seeing enemies that aren't there, firing at shadows, attacking their own comrades in drug-induced paranoia. By 1942, the German High Command finally starts restricting Pervitin distribution. Not because they suddenly develop ethical concerns about giving meth to soldiers, but because the operational costs are becoming unsustainable. Units are losing more men to drug-related collapse than to Soviet bullets. The Wehrmacht's vaunted endurance is gone. Soldiers who've been on Pervitin for years are physically wrecked and unable to perform even basic tasks without chemical assistance. The drug that was supposed to give Germany an unstoppable advantage has become a liability. But they can't stop, because entire generations of German soldiers are now addicts. Withdrawing Pervitin produces immediate, severe symptoms: crushing fatigue, depression, inability to function. Soldiers who've been taking the drug for 3 years can't operate without it. So the military tries to manage the addiction rather than eliminate it, reducing dosages, spacing out distributions, trying to wean soldiers off gradually. It doesn't work. Units that have their Pervitin supplies cut report immediate drops in effectiveness. Soldiers mutiny, steal drugs from medical facilities, refuse to fight until their chemical dependency is satisfied. The final, darkest chapter of Germany's meth addiction comes in the war's last years. As the Reich collapses and conventional supplies break down, soldiers turn to anything that might work as a substitute. Some are taking massive doses of caffeine, trying to recreate Pervitin's effects. Others are using cocaine, which is more available as pharmaceutical supply chains collapse. A few are experimenting with even more dangerous stimulants that produce Pervitin-like effects, but with worse side effects. The German military has become a force of chemical dependence, trying to sustain operations through pharmaceutical means because the soldiers themselves are too damaged to function normally. Hitler himself becomes a meth addict. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, gives him daily injections of methamphetamine mixed with other drugs. By 1944–45, and Hitler is receiving multiple injections per day, a cocktail that includes meth, cocaine, oxycodone, and various experimental compounds. His erratic decision-making in the war's final years, his refusal to accept reality, his rage at commanders who suggest retreat, his grandiose plans for counter-offensives with armies that no longer exist, all of this is happening while he's under the influence of industrial quantities of methamphetamine. The man directing Germany's war effort is a paranoid, hallucinating meth addict, making decisions that will kill millions. After the war, captured German documents revealed the full scope of Pervitin use. Allied investigators were stunned. They'd known the Germans were using stimulants. Most militaries did. But the scale was unprecedented. Over 200 million Pervitin tablets had been distributed to German forces between 1939 and 1945. Entire campaigns had been sustained by chemical enhancement. The early victories that seemed to prove German superiority were partly pharmaceutical. And the late war collapse, the inability of German forces to mount effective resistance even when defending their own territory, was partly withdrawal. An army of addicts trying to fight while their bodies and minds fell apart from years of methamphetamine abuse. The story of Nazi Germany's meth addiction is one of those historical facts that sounds too crazy to be true, but is completely documented. We have the production records. We have the distribution logs. We have thousands of letters from German soldiers describing their use of Pervitin. We have medical reports documenting the consequences. But we have testimony from survivors about how central the drug was to military operations. And yet it's still shocking because it forces us to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about World War II. The German military wasn't just tactically brilliant or ideologically driven or technologically advanced. It was chemically enhanced. The soldiers who conquered most of Europe in 2 years weren't superhuman. They were on drugs. The endurance that seemed impossible was literally impossible for normal humans. It required methamphetamine. And when that chemical advantage ran out, when the supply chains broke down and the addicted soldiers crashed, the Wehrmacht collapsed faster than anyone predicted. Not just because they were losing battles. but because their soldiers physically couldn't function without the drugs that had sustained them for years. Today, Pervitin is illegal everywhere. The same drug that the Nazi military handed out by the millions is now recognized as one of the most destructive substances humans have ever created. But for a brief period in the early 1940s, it was Germany's secret weapon. The chemical that made Blitzkrieg possible. The pharmaceutical foundation of Hitler's early victories, and ultimately the addiction that helped destroy the army it was supposed to empower. The Nazi army ran on meth. It's a fact that sounds like conspiracy theory or propaganda, but it's completely horrifyingly true. And it explains more about how World War II actually happened than most people want to admit.